I want to talk about your diet a little bit. Now, I've always been pretty healthy. I have a fast metabolism, I've never been overweight. If anything, I've been underweight. A little bit before high school and during high school. But yeah, I was working out pretty heavy in in high school and I pretty much kept a lot of that muscle, so it was never really a big factor. I never really had like a sense of urgency to really like pay attention to my diet. Pretty much after high school, I definitely slowed down on the working out. Um, but yeah, like I said, I never lost any muscle. I never lost my physique. I never got overweight, so I never really paid attention to it. Um, yeah, I was eating, a lot of slop, a lot of fast food, and even with all that stuff, I still never gained weight. But it took a toll on my mental health. It took a real toll, the way I thought and my energy, my overall energy levels. You know, so recently, with the new changes I've been making, uh, I've been making a great effort to control my eating. How often I eat and the types of food that I eat. Because when you eat food, it releases dopamine. I've heard a lot of people like stress eat. I wouldn't say I was a stress eater, but I didn't really like I said, I sound like a broken record, but I never really paid attention to it. I didn't really care. I was just kind of eating whatever. I was eating a lot of sugar. You guys know this. I've said it before. But yeah, stuff like that, just like not healthy foods. And yeah, yeah, I've been trying to cut out mainly all the unnecessary sugars. I still eat fruit, cuz that's cool. But yeah, all this processed slop, like I it's got to go. It's taking such a toll on my mental health, on my dental health, all these things. Now, when I say I'm like controlling how much I eat, like I don't get me wrong, I'm not starve maxing here by any means. I'm just trying to eat a little more consciously. There's a lot of slop that comes into my house just because it's cheap and easy and, you know, but for a while, I would just cope by saying that I had no control over the food that comes in, but like, that's just an excuse. Like, I know how to read. I can see, I can see what's in these foods. I can read the nutritional value. I can see what's in the food. And that's within your control. I'm just making better decisions on what I consume. Like I said, like before, like I was just really lazy and I just preferred the packaged foods because they were convenient. You know, Same with fast food. I would eat a lot of fast food. I would waste a lot of money on fast food just because it was a fresh hot meal or whatever. I didn't have to cook or anything. But that's slop too. Like yeah, you can look up on their websites the nutritional value, but it's not as easy with the fast foods. Like with the shit you buy in the grocery store, it has the nutritional, facts on it. But the fast food, you gotta look that shit up. They make it kind of hard to see what you're actually eating. You're literally paying these companies to make you fat and lower your energy. This is just the hell we live in. Uh, like I said, I have a fast metabolism, so none of this really had an obvious negative effect on me, or thank God any lasting effects on my health. Um, I've always been pretty active, and recently I've fallen back in love with working out, and so we're good now. Like we're we're weaning the slop out of my daily intake, my diet. A thing about cooking, like cooking your own meals at home, is is something I highly recommend. It's something that I've been practicing recently. Uh, you use more whole foods. You know, you have more control over like what you're putting in to these meals, what you're putting into your body. You know, it conditions your brain to work for your dopamine releases. I'm really lucky to have a nutritionist as my neighbor. So I go to her with a lot of questions about this topic. I've been like really trying to make an effort on controlling what I put into my body, because food can also be an addiction. You don't, it's a mind, for some people, for me for a long time, it was just kind of like a mindless thing. If I wanted a hit of dopamine, dude, I'd eat some sugar. I'd eat some fucking slop, and it would make me feel better. It wouldn't make me feel better. It would make my brain feel better. But yeah, yeah, I recommend uh being really diligent and focusing more on your diet. Um, Especially if you're struggling with addiction, with other substances, or even with eating. Like uh, or if you just want to feel better in general, because like if you eat more whole foods, like more, earthly, natural foods, then that's just good for your brain. You don't have to do research to fucking know that. Like that's just common sense. But a lot of us don't think about it. That's why I'm talking about it. That's why it's a problem. You know. But especially if you're struggling with addiction and you're trying to quit, you know, cooking your own meals, it takes up time that you would normally be spending doing, your other bad habits. Um, and just naturally, just out of that, you'll just have a lot more energy and a lot less brain fog. So yeah, take a second and pay some extra attention, and think twice, but before you put something in your mouth. Pause. But like, come on now. Let's get serious here. Let's lock in, guys. Thank you guys for listening. I really hope this helps. Christ is King.